I've been busy. I was on the Konstantinivka front with artillery teams and with civilian evac, and I was pretty busy. I'm going to be heading down south tomorrow, so I'm going to be pretty busy for a bunch of other days. We're filming on the front every other week. Every other week, we spend a week on the front. So you know that makes keeping up with the news a little difficult, but the way that the story went, and I remember saying this at the time when I heard that the day before Trump was supposed to have this big meeting with Zelensky where, all of the pro-Trump, pro-Ukraine people were saying, this is it. This is it. We finally won him over. Trump has tried everything he can to make peace with the Russians. It just failed on every front. It failed over and over and over again. This is the moment. The time has arrived. I was seeing Drew Pavlou, giving credit like, hey, here we go. Trump's finally coming on. It looks like my pivot to the right, is lining up with the moral values of my support for Ukraine. We're not hearing any critique from the pro-Ukraine people like Cam Higbee or others. Ben Shapiro was starting to talk about, it seems like, they're shifting a little bit. And then I hear Donald Trump's going to have a call with Vladimir Putin the day before the meeting. And I put out a message. I say, here is the most likely scenario given his record. And I wanted to hear, what are the odds everybody else thinks? So what's going to happen is Putin's going to call him and he's going to say, wait. I want peace. I've always wanted, I don't want you to send tomahawks. You've scared me, Mr. Trump. How about we have another meeting? How about, in fact, we have another summit? Mind you, they got nowhere with the first summit. If you looked at the first summit, not through the language of how they described it and by falling for the messaging that Trump put forward in the aftermath of that summit, or by anybody who had an invested interest for it to succeed, but at the events that played out at the summit, the only thing that happened at the summit was a private meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And then the press conference afterwards. There was supposed to be a dinner. There was supposed to be a bunch of exchanging of information between Lavrov and Marco Rubio and all these other people were supposed to talk, and they were supposed to get the finer details. They completely skipped all that, canceled everything early. They did not make, in my mind, that much actual progress. But Donald Trump, always the big sell, had to go out there and hype up, of course, Russia and the United States cultural and ties and all the history they have together, because he didn't want it to be a wash. And he is somebody who thinks that by the end of all of this, we can get another new business deal with the Russians. Exactly what we need so desperately from the Russians, I have yet to be convinced of. But, he sees this vision for business deals with the Russians. So that didn't get anywhere. So I didn't think that another summit will go anywhere. I don't think another summit will end any differently. But knowing how tragically hopeful, and that's the only way you can describe it, tragically hopeful, as in Donald Trump will look at a scenario where it's like you've got a 5% chance of hitting this 7, of hitting this red 7, and you winning this roulette spin, and you making all this money. You've put everything on red 7. That's not, you got to be careful here, sir, because that's a lot of money on an outcome that is not particularly likely. And he hears, but you hit red 7, you're going to make 50 times your money back. Oh my God, 50 times the money back. Everything on fucking red 7. I think that's the way he leans. Not to say that he's just inherently a gambler, but that he sees this as a situation that's just going to keep dragging on anyway. So he delaying his action, delaying sending, the missiles to Ukraine to put the real pressure on the Russian economy, or him delaying any further sanctions package as the Senate and the House want to move forward. It has been expressed by hard right leaders in the Senate and House and soft right, that they want to move forward. And of course, all the Democrats want to move forward on sanctions action, but he is holding them back. And that is because he wants as many opportunities as possible to wrap this war up now, because it would be easier for him for this problem not to be there. Which, I have that problem too. I've got this like weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. Like I got it like right, here, it's like, oh, is that my gallbladder? Is that this? Is that that? You know what? I'd rather it just go away with time. So I'll just kind of wait. And it's a strategy. I don't know if it's a smart strategy, but it's a strategy. And he thinks he can wait it out. And as long as the Russians can keep in the air the slightest bit of belief that they might not be screwing with him again, then I think he's going to default towards it. He's going to default towards it because he wants it to be true, because he wants to impress the people at Oslo so he can get on the Nobel Committee, so he can get all of the grandstanding and hoopla and applause. Now, whether or not this deal actually lasts and how dedicated he is to that, I don't know. I mean, he keeps talking about how he brought peace to the Congo as villages are actively getting massacred. He talks about like he immediately trounced around the victory in Gaza. We just saw strikes in Gaza kill dozens, and there were hostages getting executed by Hamas. And there was Israeli soldiers that were killed. Like, so I mean, ceasefire. It's a pretty bloody ceasefire. So Trump's record when it comes to the pieces that he has brought about could suggest that maybe the peace will not hold, but he still wants that argument. He still wants to be able to get out there. And even if he doesn't get the Norwegians to like him, bragging rights, he can still claim it. He wanted that label of peacemaker president. And so I think he wants to default in that direction. And plus, and I know this sounds base, I do think he wants to be friendly with Putin. And if he can have a reason to be friendly with Putin, I think, if he can get there, he'd enjoy that. I don't think that's his primary motivating factor. I do think that is a motivating factor. Should that be a motivating factor? No. Anyway, so I thought for all these reasons that Putin would go in there and say, oh, woof, these Tomahawk missiles scare me. Let's not do that. Let's have another summit. I thought it would work. And it did. It did work. At least it worked for a bit. Donald Trump went into that meeting with Zelensky, and my God, I have to say, this meeting might actually be worse than the public fiasco that we had before with JD Vance lecturing him in public and him getting lectured on his suit and how he needs to say thank you more, even though he said thank you at the start of that meeting, even though everything that Zelensky said about, the Russians, they agree to ceasefires, they agree to things, but do they keep them? Do they respect those agreements? All of that ended up being the case. Like, hey, it's one thing to want peace with them, but if they need to maintain the peace, they need to desire the peace. All of that ended up being true. But this meeting, I still think might have gone worse because of the talking points that Trump fell victim to, and the fact that Steve Witkoff, by being a participant, by existing in the room, actively makes anything worse. And it is very difficult for me to imagine, after seeing Steve Witkoff in action, after seeing how deep his knowledge is on Tucker Carlson's podcast, where he cannot even name the regions that he wants to give away, that this did not go well. Let's start simple. So Donald Trump had his meeting, had his phone call with Putin. He says that he, warned about the Storm Shadow missiles and stuff like that. Now, after that meeting, he walks away from it, goes into this meeting with Zelensky. And if you want to have an idea about the type of effect that Putin can have on Donald Trump's state of mind, just listen to the type of talking points he was throwing out there. Trump also said that the Russian economy is doing great, in a sharp contrast to his recent public remarks in which he urged Putin to negotiate because his economy is going to collapse. Mind you, Donald Trump was talking about the fuel queues, these long queues of Russians trying to get fuel across Russia. He was talking about how the Russian economy looked like it was in a difficult place. And if you read the Russian papers openly, Russian state papers, government papers, openly discuss recession. It looks like recession's around the corner. It's not a question of if, it's more a question of when. And there are areas where the government can get involved to put more pressures. But now, all of a sudden, Donald Trump went from, hey, the Russian economy is going to collapse, to the Russian economy is doing great. How he described it in the meeting. The Russian economy is doing great. Mind you, this is not the only time he would describe the Russian economy in, the Russians in like a positive manner. He would go on, and when talking to the press asked him like, "Hey, you said that the Ukrainians would win like a week ago, and now you're saying like the Ukrainians can't win. So can the Ukrainians win? Can the Ukrainians not win? Like what's the what's the situation?" And this is what he had to say now to give you an idea. This is post Putin call.
On the war that you haven't solved yet, Ukraine-Russia situation.
Before, mind you, he was saying just like a week ago that the Ukrainians could win back everything. And I remember the only thing I said at the time is, what am I supposed to do with this? Because I knew, we all knew that this was just a moment in time.
Have you now locked in a meeting? And can you explain, just a few weeks ago at UNGA, you said that Ukraine could possibly win the war and keep its territory, but now the story seems a bit different.
I don't think they will, but they could still win it. I never said they would win it. I said they could win. Anything can happen. War is a very strange thing. A lot of bad things happen, a lot of good things happen. If you look at the Middle East, I would say prior to us hitting Iran so hard, we could have never made that deal, because you would have had a dark cloud over the Middle East where we took out their nuclear capability, which was one of the great...
Mr. President, on the war that you haven't solved yet, the Ukraine-Russia situation, have you...
Before it was, I think they can win, we got all these stuff. Oh, well, I never said they would win. I just said they could win. I don't think they really will. I mean, but maybe, it's a possibility. So one phone call with Putin and the tone seems to change. It's not always in big ways and declarative statements. It's the vibe of how he seems to be vibing. I mean, vibing with Ukraine can win before, and now he's vibing with Ukraine probably won't win. And it seems to shift very easily depending upon the conversation. Now, one might question how I know that these shifts are coming so clearly from his conversation with Putin, that this isn't something that he got from a clear-eyed view of the facts. Well, one piece of evidence might be the language he uses. Here is one source, a European source, talking about what Trump said in the meeting. According to a European official with knowledge of the meeting, Trump told Zelensky that Putin had told him the conflict was a special operation, not even a war. Adding that the Ukrainian leader needed to cut a deal or face destruction. The official said Trump told Zelensky he was losing the war, warning, if Putin wants it, he will destroy you. At one point in the meeting, the U.S. president threw Ukraine's maps of the battlefield to one side. The official familiar with the encounter said, according to the official, Trump said he was sick of seeing maps of the front line of Ukraine again and again. Okay, so special operation, not even a war. This is straight out of Putin's mouth. But the later half of this is interesting. The half of it that Donald Trump is influenced very easily by what Putin says or the evidence, quote unquote, that they present. For example, the fact that Donald Trump very quickly said the Ukrainians are encircled in Kursk when the Ukrainians were not encircled in Kursk, after his meeting with the Russians, very clearly picking that up from Vladimir Putin in that conversation where he was trying to pressure the United States to say, hey, this is a hopeless effort, make the Ukrainians surrender. Yeah. So it's not that this is surprising that he can get influenced by Putin. The second part of this is more, I think, indicative of not only Donald Trump's approach to Ukraine, but also his approach to a lot of these issues that he's doing diplomacy on. He threw Ukraine's maps of the battlefield to one side. Trump said he was sick of seeing the map of the front line of Ukraine again and again. Donald Trump talked about this war as a 24-hour extravaganza. His sycophants like Tim Pool and his other propagandists came out and said that not only would he get the war done and over with quickly, that he would get it done and over with before he was even sworn into office. They were talking about him as if he was a mythical peacemaker. And now we've moved from that to 10 months of failure. And after doing nothing, he's all out of ideas. He sees the front line ever evolving without his interaction, and he's gotten apathetic. To a front line he doesn't have the depth of knowledge to truly understand. It can be explained to him in bits and pieces. But when he's got people like Tulsi Gabbard in the cabinet to come in there to try to give him the daily intelligence brief to help break down what's going on, I'm not surprised that the Ukrainians and Trump might find it frustrating when they have to play catch up on the advantages that Ukraine has or the difficulties that's ahead of them for the Russians, when he's coming in there with the base knowledge of, oh, I heard you were encircled at Kursk. Oh, I heard that the Russians are going to capture Pokrovsk in 3 weeks. And that was, say, like 4 or 5 months ago. I mean, I heard the Russians talking about capturing Pokrovsk last winter. Now the Russians might actually capture Pokrovsk this winter. So there doesn't seem to just be a statement here of Trump picking up the language of the occupier. There seems to also be a clear disinterest in following the finer details of whether the war is or is not winnable. And look, I expect Trump to have a general idea of what's going on in the front line every day. If he doesn't want to know all the bits and pieces, fine. But he needs to have somebody there who can do the work that is boring, even if he's sick of doing it. Okay, I heard Kash Patel got very tired of his daily briefs. Actually, this seems to be a running trend. A running trend in the Trump cabinet is people getting tired of the fact that their positions come with a daily brief. So they simply either reduce it to every other day, and it's not a daily brief, it's an every other daily brief, or they just otherwise make it weekly or otherwise reduce or cancel it. And I think that, if you want to do that, I don't think it's great for the position. But if you're going to do that, you need somebody else who can manage the stuff that you find boring and you don't want to manage. I would say that usually this might be a job for a Dick Cheney type president, but J.D. Vance has made very clear that he doesn't care about this either. I remember him running for Senate saying, I do not care. Ukraine was invaded, and he said, I do not care. So he probably does not seem like the best option either. Not a lot of great options. Not a lot of great options. It was pretty bad, one source said at the meeting. The message was, your country will freeze and your country will be destroyed if Ukraine doesn't make a deal with Russia. A separate source denied that Trump said Ukraine would be destroyed. Both sources said, however, that Trump resorted to profanity several times. Few sources had the impression that Trump was influenced by a Thursday call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. During that call, according to the Washington Post, Putin proposed a territorial swap in which Ukraine would cede the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk in return for a small part of Zaporizhia and Kherson. One of the sources said that the U.S. official proposed precisely that swap to Zelensky on Friday. Are you curious which U.S. official proposed that swap and thought it was a good idea? By the way, some numbnuts on Twitter were saying, oh, really? Ukraine gets all of Zaporizhia and Kherson to give up the parts of unoccupied Donetsk? That doesn't seem too bad. No. What they're saying, what the Russians are saying is, we get to keep occupied Kherson. We get to keep occupied Crimea. We get to keep occupied Luhansk. We get to keep occupied Zaporizhia. We get to keep occupied Donetsk. And we get to get the rest of unoccupied Donetsk. But you, Ukraine, by the way, I don't think they said anything about what would happen to the rest of the Dnipro region. You get to keep the city of Kherson, which you took back in bloody combat, in which the Russians have been hunting the civilians there like for sport. So that's the offer that's on the table. It's still a maximalist demand that would get rid of some of Ukraine's most defensible positions in the Donetsk region, as well as getting up cities that the Russians have not taken, and getting rid of a lot of the defensive encampments that the Ukrainians have worked to build. So basically, you would be allowing the Russians to divert all those defenses and hoping that they do not exploit it for offensive purposes. Especially since, they're also insisting that Ukraine don't join any alliance structure that would disincentivize a future invasion. But if you're curious as to what U.S. official thought this was a good idea, two sources said U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, again, the Middle East envoy, somehow wiggles his way into it once again, was among those who was most aggressively urging the Ukrainians to agree to the Russian swap proposal. Witkoff mentioned that Donetsk and Luhansk have significant Russian-speaking populations, one of the sources said, a point he made publicly before. Now, look, this is something he said on the Tucker Carlson podcast. This is something he said on other programs. Ireland does not speak Irish. Okay, the population of Ireland that speaks Irish is very small. They have it in school. They have people in the very, very rural countryside who speak it. The majority of the population speaks English. If you ask them if they're part of England, they will not be very happy. Okay, I speak English. I am not English. I come from the United States. I know many people who speak Russian. You tell them they're Russian, they're not going to be happy. And that's not just true in Ukraine, by the way. That's not just true in cities like Kharkiv, cities like Kherson, cities like Dnipro, Dima, Anna, Anastasia, so many of the friends of the channel that we know. These are Bogdan, my fixer. These are Russian speakers who are Ukrainians. So them just speaking Russian and saying, "Oh, they speak Russian anyway. I guess they're Russian." If the Russians got Anastasia under their control, there's a good chance she would be disappeared. Oh, but she speaks Russian, so I'm sure they're all the same. I mean, this is idiotic. But this is the highest level diplomats are throwing up there. This is a real estate agent playing diplomat. And this is the result of it, is he's getting played by the KGB, where even they are picking his translators when he comes to Moscow. Look it up. It's real. Look it up. And so Witkoff says that Ukrainians obviously don't take well to it. And they threw out the Ukrainian position on this when it comes to Witkoff is they don't like him. The position of the Russians hasn't changed. They want us to withdraw from the Donbass, not the entire East, but specifically Donbass. That is completely from Donetsk and Luhansk regions, with Zelensky. I made it clear that Ukraine's stance in this context remains unchanged. I explained this both to President Trump and to Mr. Witkoff, the only other person in the meeting that Zelensky names. We understand that Mr. Witkoff is simply conveying what Russia means. This does not necessarily reflect his own view, at least according to him. At least according to him. They know that is his view. They know that is what he thinks should be done. We heard what he said on Tucker Carlson's podcast. We heard him talk about the referendum in occupied territory as if it was legitimate. A legitimate referendum. He has taken up the Russian position on occupied territory, on Crimea, on Donetsk, on Luhansk, on all these areas. He has taken out the position that the Russians are actually making a generous offer. Because the way he looks at this is not like international diplomacy. He looks at this like a crude businessman, like this is a real estate deal where you evict some family or you make some hostile takeover. This is not just some business deal. You can't just evict the tenant. These are people's homes and villages that they've lived in forever. And he's treating it very callously. And it's being reflected in the way that Ukrainians view him and those in the know view him. Because those in the know, the standard is that Witkoff is a fucking moron. Okay? If you want to do the type of like personal politics of the Middle East where, you know, you bribe here and you threaten there, that might go to a certain length, that might go a certain way in certain Middle Eastern dictatorships. That's not going to play as well in Ukraine. That's not going to play as well when, you know, these displaced people have political weight and Zelensky trying to push through by really trying to push through anti-corruption reforms, which really reeled in the independence of the anti-corruption agencies. There were protests that went on through curfew, through military curfew. They rolled that shit back quick. These are different societies. These are completely different societies. It's not gonna, the diplomacy, the government's different, the society's different. It does not work the same way. This is not a real estate deal. But he treats it like it. And he has the knowledge of it that shows that he's a man in a field trying to apply the expertise he has somewhere else in an area it does not apply. Square peg, triangle hole. I made it clear to him, Steve Witkoff, that there are some misleading impressions. The story is that the Russians claim they supposedly held a referendum among the Russian people in Donbass and that they supposedly want to join Russia. But first, there was the occupation, and only afterward did something uncontrolled and clearly illegal happen, which they called a referendum. Moreover, I would say that these signals from the Russians are so far from reality that 10 years passed between the start of the occupation and the so-called referendum. Do you see where it doesn't add up? Basically saying all the people who would have voted pro-Ukraine, they left. They were forced out. Mr. Witkoff points out that it was incorporated into their constitution. So I explained to Mr. Witkoff once again that if tomorrow Putin adds something else to their constitution, after the war ends in one way or another, will we need to withdraw from some territory again? And if, for example, I amend the constitution of Ukraine to include 2 regions of the Russian Federation, would they have to leave those territories? This is a non-functional model. I mean, he's not wrong. Saying that, oh, you know, Kherson, Zaporizhia, these are part of their constitution. And there's a question of what they can physically hold right now. That's something we can interact with. But if what you're saying is true, that, oh, it's part of their constitution, you should take this land swap in the Donetsk region. What stops them from not changing their constitution, coming back and invading again for the rest of Kherson and Zaporizhia down the line? Especially once you got around the defenses around Donetsk. Especially once the United States is distracted possibly elsewhere, be it with some conflict over Taiwan or wherever. I mean, Steve Witkoff here, I mean, he gets torn up pretty hard by Zelensky, but I mean, he's gotten torn up by traditional analysts. He's gotten torn up by just the Ukrainians with the base knowledge. Anybody with the knowledge of, you know, language issues in Ukraine. Anybody who knows how that referendum was conducted. I mean, soldiers going door to door with rifles, collecting these sheets of paper. I mean, that's not how most people do referendums. That's not how most people do referendums. Is by soldiers of an occupying army holding rifles in front of you while you they make you fill out your ballot at your doorstep, so they're showing you that they know their address. I mean, that's not how most referendums are done. And most referendums usually include the people who live there, not only the people who stayed after the majority of people left town. That's not a referendum of that community. That's a referendum of a ghost town. I mean, it's might not sound nice, but it's the truth. So it didn't go well, the meeting, but it didn't go well even further. And there is some reports that are saying that Donald Trump really pushed this idea of maybe they should accept the Donbass withdrawal, that there was cussing involved in the meeting, you know, that it got provocative in that way. but the Ukrainians did not back off on the idea of, hey, we'll withdraw from this territory, we'll withdraw from that territory. They didn't back off on that. And so how the meeting ended after they locked horns on that was that they would agree to just do the line freeze the front line as they had discussed before. So we were right back to where we were after all of that. Right back to square one, 10 months into it, freeze the front line. Might as well go back to calling for a ceasefire or we'll implement sanctions. I mean, we're right. Here we are again. My own personal Groundhog Day of hell. Endlessly. And so they agreed to that. And then after that, there is an agreement announced by Donald Trump, announced by his team, that there is going to be a new peace conference. After the talk with Zelensky and after the talk with Putin, there's going to be a new peace conference with the Russians in Budapest, Hungary. And it's going to be in Budapest, Hungary, because the Hungarians are good friends with both the Russians and this administration. And so the Trump administration thinks that they could facilitate negotiations between Putin and Trump. Well, I mean, obviously they could not facilitate talks between Putin and Zelensky, considering they have a bad relationship with Zelensky. And when Trump was asked about this, he just was like, oh, well, then I can communicate what they said to Zelensky. But when he's going in there with special military operation, we got encircled around Kursk, and then you add Viktor Orban to the mix, I don't know if they're going to come with anything, away from that that's workable, or a grenade that's going to blow up in Trump's hand. And if it just blows up closer to the Ukrainians, maybe he'll blame the Ukrainians, and then there'll be no forthcoming support. Now, I do want to throw out there that when we were trying to figure out exactly why Hungary was the location, I knew why. I mean, it's because of the relationship that Viktor Orban has with both Donald Trump and Putin. But a journalist asked it straight up, and Caroline Levitt responded not politely. Is the president aware of the significance of Budapest? In 1994, Russia promised in Budapest not to invade Ukraine. It gave up the nuclear weapons it inherited when the Soviet Union dissolved. Does he not see why Ukraine might object to that site? Who suggested Budapest? Thanks. And then Caroline Levitt responded, your mom did. The journalist asks, of course, it's funny to you? And then Caroline Levitt, grandstanding, it's funny to me that you actually consider yourself a journal. You are a far left hack who nobody takes seriously, including your colleagues in the media. They just don't tell you that to your face. Stop texting me your disingenuous, biased, and bullshit question. Now, mind you, this question was 100% fair. Of course, Ukrainians would find Budapest to be a sore spot, considering it was the same location where their sovereignty in a situation like this was guaranteed was not going to happen in the first place. So, yeah, that makes sense. Also, I think the suggestion of why it would be Budapest, even if you could say that that symbolism doesn't matter, would still be a good question, because having the government put on record that the reason that it's in Budapest is because of the Hungarians' relationship with both the Russians and them, it's good to get something like that on record. And so to react like this childishly, and then to respond afterwards by saying, nobody really likes you, you're disingenuous, is a bullshit question for you to ask me why we're having a summit in a city. Excuse me, Mr. President. Why, President Brazil, why are we deciding to have the Olympics in this country? Bullshit question. Why, always with the why? Ridiculous. By the way, she was not the only one to respond. Your mom, Chung, another Trump admin, also responded similarly to the same question with your mom. Now, mind you, this is after the first peace summit failed, and we've had, as of today, over 10 months of failure on negotiating with the Russians. on top of what happened in the preliminary talks while he was president-elect. So if you want to include the president-elect period, I mean, we've got a year. We've got a year of failure, 10 months to a year, depending on your interpretation. And so after that much failure and a peace summit that already failed, continuing seemingly to pursue the same policy, which has failed, them asking, why Budapest? Why this location? Give us some reason to believe you have a chance of success. And they treat the journalists as if they're stupid for asking such a question. It's not a biased question. It's just that you're a crybaby who hears hostility in everything. Now, there's one problem for this image, is that it seemed that despite her inability to look like a grown woman, it seemed that she was not the only people in the admin who was unable to make themselves not look childish. So Donald Trump pushes forward with his Budapest summit. We want to go out there to Budapest and negotiate peace, shake hands, and XYZ. We want to do XYZ. And so he has Marco Rubio have a phone call with Sergei Lavrov on whether or not, we can get this or that fine detail refined when it comes to finding an end to the war. Negotiating the finer details of a peace settlement. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We're getting closer. We're getting closer. But as we get closer, we find out that we're still as far away as ever. As Sergei Lavrov continues to repeat the maximalist demand, according to all reports of the conversation, continuing to ask for Russia to get basically everything, asking for, anything but a frozen front line. And Marco Rubio walked away from the conversation, essentially thinking that the Russians are still pushing their maximalist line. They haven't moved whatsoever. And seemingly advising the president of the United States that they should not go forward with the Budapest conference. They should not go forward with the Budapest summit because we are no closer to peace. And so, after that, the reports hit the airwaves that seems like there isn't going to be a Budapest summit. It seems like peace summit, Peace Summit 0.2, Electric Boogaloo 2.0, Electric Boogaloo, it ain't happening. That the Trump administration wants to make sure that if they're going to have another peace summit, it doesn't end with just a lot more fist bumps right before an announcement on primetime television that the Russians just broke another all-time record for a massive air attack at the same time that the Trump administration, in an effort to preserve these talks, continues to hold back on any form of escalation. It's not like approving any of these energy strikes without any more supply is particularly any escalation if the Ukrainians had been engaging in the energy campaign already. The closest you can even get to anything resembling escalation from the Trump side was the providing of intelligence. That's it. So after 10 months to a year, depending on your perspective, you would think that getting to actually get in the same room and talk with the Russians would be the simplest part of this process. But it seems we're still stuck up on it. Here's a reporter asking, why do you think the Budapest summit might be wasted time? Which was something that Trump said, that it could be wasted time. Mr. President, the meeting with Vladimir Putin was canceled or put on hold. Do you know what happened there? And President Trump said, no, I don't want to have a wasted meeting. Mind you, Trump never officially says it is for sure canceled. And as of right now, it's still up in the air whether it is officially canceled, with Trump saying he'll know in the next 2 days whether it is.
Mr. President, the meeting with Vladimir Putin is canceled or put on hold. Do you know what happened there? Does that affect your decision whether or not to send tomahawks?
No, I don't want to have a wasted meeting. I don't want to have a waste of time, so I'll see what happens. But we did all of these great deals, great peace deals. They're all peace deals, agreements, solid agreements, every one of them. But this one, and I said, go to the line of battle, the battlefield lines, and you pull back and you go home, and everybody take some time off, because you got two countries that are killing each other. You got two countries that are losing 5,000 to 7,000 soldiers a week. So we'll see what happens.
Is that how Trump views peace? Just taking some time off of war? Just taking a breather? Peace is really more just a time to reload. No wonder he called what happened in the Congo peace before the ADF and M23 and Congolese government allied militias immediately resumed violence after the talks that Trump pushed. When the talks, he didn't even include M23 in, and it was Qatar who had to go out of their way to get M23 to agree to any sort of talk. But here is Trump talking about how it isn't for sure canceled, but we won't know anything for the next 2 days.
President, what changed your mind after talking to Vladimir Putin between then and now? Why did you think that a Budapest summit might be wasted time?
Well, I didn't say anything. I didn't say it would, and you never know what's going to happen. But a lot of things are happening on that front, on the war front, with Ukraine and Russia. And we'll be notifying you over the next 2 days as to what we're doing.
Did you hear something?
A lot of things are happening.
Did you hear something?
I think we're going to get it solved.
Okay, so there's a pretty simple explanation as to what's going on here, as to how Trump went from 2 weeks ago saying that Ukraine can win the war to, Russia could destroy you essentially in private meetings and cussing and all this, after having that phone call with Putin and then having this call with Zelensky, meeting with Zelensky, the same meeting with Zelensky that many, again, pro-Ukraine, pro-Trump people were saying, hey, look, this will be the moment. This will be the day. And it certainly was not. The explanation is quite simple. The explanation is that Trump is flip-flopping. That Trump is going back and forth because Trump is easily swayed in these conversations. That both Zelensky and Putin are very good at communicating. Zelensky from decades and decades in the media, an environment that Trump has experience in, and from Putin being an experienced KGB manipulator who has decades in geopolitical diplomacy and time before that in local governance when he was working in St. Petersburg politics. So I think both of these individuals are very good at painting a picture, and they all have data sets that maybe Trump is not being made aware of in the immediate sense. And then in the aftermath of these meetings, after Tulsi Gabbard doesn't tell him some data that Putin told him during his meeting, or that Zelensky told him in his meeting, either because it was bullshit and so Tulsi Gabbard rightly filtered it out, or because Tulsi Gabbard is not really good at her job. She hasn't done anything like this before. She's never managed this much intelligence before, and she's never been the top intelligence official in the country. Or been the second or third or fourth or 1 millionth. She has only handled classified intelligence in the past, and now she's supposed to filter through what's good and what's not. So it could be that Trump is getting taken for a ride, and that combined with his, again, tragic hopefulness. Some people might call it naivete. I would say call it his tragic hopefulness. Is leading to him getting dragged around for over 10 months now. But how long can this charade go on? Is it really going to be 10 months to then a year after his inauguration? Are we going to be going into November and into December once this month is wrapped up, saying, oh, what is he going to do next? November, December. Will we have government action going into January of 2026? We might be heading straight for that scenario. I mean, the hope would be that in the next 2 days, like Trump said, we won't get any new advancements, or we will get an advancement, we'll get some update, and then it'll be like, okay, now we're getting an announcement on further action for Ukraine. But you know what it could be? It could also be, okay, the Russians play out another 2 days, another 2 days of airstrikes, another 2 days of fighting on the Pokrovsk axis, and then right at the end of the 2 days, they say, okay, we're willing to discuss other options to address the root cause in order to have the Budapest summit We have to plan that. So let's plan that for 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks pass by, which was supposed to be the original time. And so in 2 weeks, that would be probably November 7th and 8th. So we're going into the second week of November, either in the aftermath or starting. And so then you're going into midway November. And when the Budapest Memorandum, not Budapest Memorandum, Budapest Summit is ending, and you've just bought, again, another month. And from the Russian perspective, even if it complodes right there, even if at that moment they're like, we've run out of options, we have no more ideas on how to delay this. We've literally run out of distractions. The paddle ball is no longer working. You know, we tried the rubbery pencil trick, and Donald Trump is actually going to let the Senate go forward with sanctions. Donald Trump has actually given Ukraine some longer missiles. If in that moment it happens, they've already succeeded in delaying American action for 11 to 12 months. They've already succeeded in moving the front line to curl around the city of Pokrovsk, when in May of this year, there was no Dobropila penetration. In May of this year, there was, they were starting to encircle it on 3 sides, but it was just starting. It was partially encircled. Now it was really encircled on 3 sides with one way out in the western direction, west-east. And so the situation has gotten worse on the Kupiansk front. The situation has gotten worse, obviously, on the Pokrovsk front. The Russians have taken a lot of casualties in that time, but Trump is not doing anything to either heighten those casualties in a way that will bring the war to a rapid conclusion, or help take out the ways that war is made to bring the war to a rapid conclusion. He shows feigning interest in it, where he'll say in a moment of clarity, like, oh, wow, we need to get the Russians to get to the table. I guess we need to compel them. Hey, Ukraine, you should compel them. Do some more strikes on their energy infrastructure. And then we provide them none of the munitions to do so. Well, if we want them to do that, we're going to have to provide them with the tools to do it. I mean, if you look at the ruins in Konstantinivka, the mural that was put up there in 2022 and that I've passed a million times is not talking about, hey, America, come fight our battles. Hey, we want U.S. Marines clearing trenches all the way to Donetsk. It is saying, give us the tools. Give us the aerial bombs. Give us the artillery. Give us the tools, job, and we will do the job. And we will get it done. And so if Trump wants to shake this up and doesn't want to be looked like as a flip-flopper, which is what he is and is what I warned of the night he got elected, as what I saw as the most likely scenario, as he's just trying to constantly shift and jostle to find the best immediate position to be in. Like he just looks weak. It doesn't look like he's jostling for the best position for the United States. It looks like he's jostling for the best positions to slip and slide away and find the path of least resistance to impress the people at Oslo.